For fishers in southwest Madagascar, this is a familiar sight. Hundreds of wooden pirogues, sailed by the skilled Vezo seafaring people, navigate the choppy ocean strait between their village and the island of Nosihau. For the past 2 months, the reefs around the island have been off limits to local fishers to allow octopus, a crucial economic resource and source of food, to increase in both size and number. Like many small-scale fishers around the world, the Vezo people rely heavily on the ocean for their livelihoods, and the decline in marine life populations presents a serious threat to the economic well-being of the Vezo. But today, this community is optimistic. As the reefs around the island reopen, fishers of all ages begin to search along the flats and sail out to deeper waters, hoping to be rewarded for their patience. 450 kilometers to the north of Madagascar, Comoros is one of Africa's smallest nations, but its communities have big hopes for managing their oceans responsibly. In 2017, Blue Ventures coordinated a series of learning exchanges between fishing communities in Comoros and communities from the neighbouring islands of Madagascar and Zanzibar.
Amba kavwaka bahari kaka na zintu dentro para amba wajaba ya bahari zao wafanya zama wajawa para manufa wayafanya da waranye samba tongweni rifanya hasababu de bahari ile uribaya hule daraja raeshi daraja fanya zama daraja para tongozimba.
Inspired by what they heard, and equipped with a new understanding of how these closures could benefit them and the health of their octopus fishery, Dahari, a Comorian organisation, worked with 3 communities to coordinate their own closure for 4 months in 2018. On the day the fishery was reopened, fishers waited for low tide as usual, and then walked out to search for octopus hidden in crevices in the reef. Their excitement was obvious.
Vunaya mema. Sijivua swafi vorabaya. Doti sikikilo sabawa nusu apresa. Zabone swafi. Ana rimoja halini lawa 2 kilo. 3 kilo. Sisikwenguwa shintu wavo. Lazimwani rifanye ribaira zaidi ya mana mavuna ya mema.
Nearly 9,000 kilometers away, on the Indonesian island of Darawa, a local fisher makes an offering known as Alo Anu Imbu to express gratitude to the community's ancestors before the octopus area is reopened.
Pengelolaan musim tangkapan gurita di Darawa itu kita mulai dengan membangun kesepahaman dengan nelayan, pemerintah desa, pembeli, pemimpin adat, lalu kemudian masyarakat sepakat untuk dimonitoring. Data monitoring setiap hari yang kita ukur itu adalah berat per ekor, betina atau jantan. Terus data itu kemudian dikumpulkan setelah 3 bulan. Data itu dianalisis per bulan, setiap bulan dikembalikan kepada kita. Setiap 3 bulan kita umpan balik ke masyarakat. Apa pilihan?
Ada 3 sisi keuntungan setelah adanya kegiatan kesepakatan masyarakat ini. Pertama, ada kesadaran masyarakat. Kedua, peningkatan pendapatan masyarakat di situ. Nah, yang ketiga, persoalan perkembangbiakan daripada gurita di situ memang ada.
Back in southwest Madagascar, vast numbers of people have shown up for the first day of the octopus fishery opening in 2018.
Lafa misy ty reserve na olo tsy mpihaka regny mihaky aby io tsy mahamaro ny gurita io fa laha ny olo mpihaka andavanandro avao mety misy avao reserve mamokatra avao. Aveo hevitsiko aminy la soa fe vasa olo tamin'ny reserve lihany vasa olo maro mare de tsy misy gurita.
De tamin'ny tao lasa hita fa nisy zany le vokatsy soa fa ny fokon'olo nisy avao koa zany ny fokon'olo zay nahita fa tsy nahomby zay reserve fisokafana reserve de nieritseritsy zany ozy teo hoe ino ny raha tokony hatao mba hahafaha manarana an'izay resaka jony horita zay. tsy mahanjy ela zany zao fa tiako hita sahady hoe hanao akory zay vokatsy ny fanapahan-kevitsy teo farany zay hatao zay.
Octopus fishery closures are really just the first step in a longer process towards creating areas of the coast and sea which are managed by the community with their needs and goals in mind.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining Blue Ventures' latest Toko Telo session. We're talking about, does community-led fisheries management work? We're encouraging people to say hi, let us know where you're from in the chat. But first, my name is Charlie Goff, and I work for Blue Ventures, and I'm the head technical advisor for fisheries management and conservation. Today, I'm chairing this interactive discussion on whether and how community-led fisheries management is working. Today, we're hoping to show some of the successes of community-led fisheries management, highlighting what's working well, what challenges the communities have overcome, and also what challenges remain for future success, for scaling and for sustainability. To do this, we're really happy to bring together the panel that will be able to provide their insights into the importance of community-led fisheries management from the different contexts that they're coming from. So I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers today. They're Dr. Naveen Namboothri from Dakshin Foundation in India. We've got Misbahul Mohammed from Dahari in the Comores, and also joining from the Comores, working with Blue Ventures, who supports the Dahari group. And we also have Ahmed from So this is our panel. But before we hear from our speakers, just a quick recap of the format for today's session and a bit of housekeeping. So first of all, there's going to be two parts to the event today. Firstly, our speakers will talk us through their work with their presentations, followed by a question and answer session. So please do submit your questions in the comments during the talks, and we'll be putting those questions to the speakers. In the second part, for those that have registered, we'll be splitting out into breakout groups, and in those, there's a chance for everyone to discuss those sessions and these topics in greater detail. The first section with the panelists and the question and answers will be recorded, and this will be available to watch after the session. The breakout sessions won't be recorded, but we will be creating some written feedback as well as the resources from our speakers, and all of that will be available on the Toko Telo website as soon as possible after the event. So just a reminder, so if you want to ask a question to the speakers, please use the YouTube comments box. You'll need to be logged into your YouTube account to submit a question. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the session and as the panelists are speaking, and we'll be putting them to the speakers at the end of the three presentations. Ideally, if you can, direct your question to a specific panel member. That would be really great. For any technical problems, please send an email to digital@blueventures.org. And also, at the end of the session, there will be a short feedback questionnaire. We would really appreciate you taking a moment to fill it in, as this helps us to improve future Toko Telo events. Now, over to our speakers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Naveen Namboothri. Naveen is the director and founder trustee of the Dakshin Foundation, an Indian NGO whose mission is to inform and advocate for conservation and natural resource management while promoting and supporting sustainable livelihoods, social development, and environmental justice. Naveen is a marine biologist by training, and his technical expertise is drawn on across Dakshin's wide portfolio of field projects, including their long-term ecological monitoring and environmental education programs, as well as community-led fisheries management in Lakshadweep, which Naveen is going to be telling us about today. So I'm very excited to hear your presentation, Naveen. So over to you.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks for that kind introduction. So, yeah, like Charlie mentioned, I work with an organization called Dakshin Foundation. We're based in India, in Bangalore, and we work on across multiple different, marine sites across the coastline. And what I'm going to talk about today is our primary work in the Lakshadweep Islands, where we have initiated a small community, you know, based resource management kind of an effort. So just to give you some background, Lakshadweep is now trending in social media across India for all the wrong reasons. You may want to follow hashtag Save Lakshadweep if you want to get more information on what's going on there. But our interest in these islands have primarily been so. Just to give you some background, Lakshadweep are coral atolls and located on the in the Arabian Sea, about 500 miles, 500 kilometers as the crow flies from the the town, the city of Cochin, if you're aware where that is. So it has very strong connections with the mainland. It's very tightly connected in terms of all the commodities that are required for the people who live there. There's a constant trade route connection with the mainland. Lakshadweep is primarily a uh, you know it's a continuation of the Maldives type Chagos archipelago, and like I said, these are coral atolls, and what you see there, uh, if you can see the pointer, is a ring of reefs that pretty much act barriers for the islands that are located within. Right. So yeah, and Lakshadweep. What's interesting about Lakshadweep is that it's a homogeneous community, except one of those islands called Minicoy, which is boxed down on the right side in that larger box. The southernmost island, which has very close similarities culturally and in many other ways with Maldives, even in terms of the language and all of that spoken there. But all the rest of the islands are uh, quite homogeneous in terms of their social, cultural, as well as the ecological setting of these islands. And um, the reason why we've been interested in Lakshadweep is also because of the fact that so for us, it's a small administrative unit. It's what we call union territory here. So it's directly governed by the center, and that's something that makes governance also quite straightforward. And being smaller administrative units, our engagements are a lot more easier. Can move on to the next slide. What got our interest with these islands is this particular live bait Poland line tuna fisheries, which a lot of you would be aware of the Poland line tuna fisheries worldwide. But for those of you who don't know much about it, it's a very uh, done properly within sustainable limits. It's actually quite a one of the most sustainable fishing practices, and this is something that's traditionally been carried out in Lakshadweep Islands, the Taipei and line tuna fisheries, which in a way helps keep the fishing pressure off the coral reefs, and you know in a way the amount of pressure on reef fish is much lesser if this particular fisheries was not the primary fisheries of these islands. It's work intensive, so it provides a lot of livelihoods for local communities. There's literally no bycatch, and has very little impact on the habitat as well. So for us, it's like a very sustainable fishing practice. It's located in a fairly homogeneous system with a smaller administrative unit and very high literacy rates. It's also one of those communities with I think more than 96-97% literacy rates on the island. So it's quite an for us it rendered itself as a nice comfortable system to work with. Can move on to the next. So with this fishery is as sustainable as it is, it has been going through certain transitions as well. And one of the main reasons driving these transitions is the bait fish. So they catch live bait from the reef, from the lagoons, and then go out, keep them alive, go out to the sea, and use them to catch skipjack tuna. But this live bait itself was becoming a very limited resource, and a lot of the a lot of the resources were getting overexploited. So which also kind of translated to rising operational costs. People had to go for 8 hours to catch live bait and come back and catch tuna, which is probably just half an hour away. So it meant a significant increase in operational costs. The markets were controlled by a few, individuals, intermediaries or middlemen, and that also kind of led to poor market returns. And there were lots of unsustainable practices that had come in, particularly with the bait fish harvest and all of that. And so that kind of got our interest in terms of trying. Those were some of the challenges that we were interested in tackling, because it would, if not addressed, these things could easily push the entire fishery down an unsustainable pathway. So we were very keen to help slow down these transitions or reverse them. Can move on to the next. So what we did is initiated our interventions there with. So what was pointed out by both the resource managers, as well as mostly by the resource managers and fisheries managers, was that the data availability was very little to kind of make any assumptions about the trends in the fishery. So, there were lots of questions about the data available, the quality of the data that was available, and the fisher communities themselves were aware of it. Like I said, they're a literate community, so they do engage with, they won't shy away from engaging with data and, the trends and whatever that was published as, what's happening with Lakshadweep fishery. So there was a general consensus that data was not available, and what was available was not up to the mark. The community, so we sat down with communities, and they were, they were ready to try and give it a shot at collecting data themselves. So it was primarily a community-based fisheries monitoring exercise that we did. We worked closely with the communities, and it was a co-created, monitoring protocol. And based on what their needs are and what are the needs of, to do fisheries management, what is the kind of inputs you need, those were all discussed, and the protocol was co-created, which meant there was a bit of, buy-in from the community to begin with. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide, please. So we've done this over 4 years. The last year and a half after the pandemic hit, it's slowed out significantly. We haven't been able to access a lot of the our collaborators on ground. We worked on 4 islands. About 50 fishing boats have participated, and we have had about 4,000 plus fishing records over these years. Each record is each data point is a fishing expedition. Yeah, can move on. So for us, the monitoring exercise itself was not the end of what we are trying to achieve here. Like I said, the whole plan is to try and address the unsustainability that was kicking into the fisheries system. So what we wanted to do is to try and, for us, the monitoring program actually served as a very good stepping stone to talk about actual management interventions. And it kind of primed communities as well as the local fisheries departments to talk about participatory management and what is it that we can do to address these issues. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So we did have a few, as part of our co-management initiative, we had a couple of consultations, on 4 islands, and we had, on 3 major islands, we had 3 separate consultations. And during those consultations, the fishers themselves agreed to ban a lot of the unsustainable fishing practices. They decided not to use fine mesh, to slowly phase out the mesh that was being used to harvest bait fish, which led to a lot of wastage in catch, as well as they decided to stop using LED lights to attract bait, and they also decided to not stop throwing tuna waste and all of that into the lagoons, which also created a lot of pollution within the lagoon. So some of these these 3 things, these 3 things, they agreed to immediately pass a resolution and ban out, or phase out over a period of time. But there were also other conversations had on LMMAs, or locally managed marine reserves, specifically for bait fish management. And for us, that was the start point. But unfortunately, then the lockdown and all of that happened, the department from their side had offered to support this through a government order that supports, some of these bans that the communities themselves had decided. So for us, the monitoring program was was quite an exciting and successful story. But more than that, it's also how it led towards a lot of conversations about management, and finally culminated in, the administration and the department and the fisher communities coming together and, making these decisions to improve the, the sustainability of the fish stocks. Next one, please. So if one were to ask, does, community-led management work everywhere in all conditions? Is this something that's going to, be as easy as, what happened in Lakshadweep, which actually took more than 5-6 years for us to get to the stage of, having everyone sit together at a table. And, it required a lot of trust building. It required a lot of, preparing the communities for a lot of these conversations. So for us, lots of things matter. Like I said, when I gave the context for Lakshadweep, the literacy levels, the more, the similarity between the community cohesion, all of that mattered significantly. The homogeneity of the community and all of that mattered. And then context matter a lot, like how, what levels are these communities at? Are they ready to engage with management exercises? Are they ready to engage with departments? How good is the administration locally, open to looking at and supporting some of these decisions that the community would make? The socio-political landscape, also the ability to sustain a lot of these interventions. So, for us, we, as an organization, we do understand that long-term sustainability would come only by, being able to face ourselves out of it. So we're also looking at a, over a long term, we do want to implement an exit strategy as well, where we are in a place where we can, confidently hand over a lot of these. Right now, we're playing the facilitator's role, but we try ideally let local institutions and community groups come up and take and run with this entirely on their own. Yeah, there are certain practices locally managed on some islands. Like I said, Minicoy, one of those islands from where the Polendine tuna fishing started, and then, kind of was taken to the other islands. There are very strong, at least used to be very strong management practices in place, specifically for bait and many other, resources that are very limiting. So there's a lot of lessons that are there locally. We just need to have an open, mind and see how one can integrate a lot of this into, the contemporary fisheries management, the science-based fisheries management. I think that's pretty much it. I'd like to thank a lot of, this is a collective work that the Sustainable Fisheries Program and a lot of others with Induction have been involved in. So I'm presenting on the organization's behalf, but specifically for these illustrations and photographs, there are a few credits that I'd like to give. The next one, a lot of this work was thanks to, funding, including Blue Ventures and, a lot of other donors who've been very supportive over the period of over our journey. So, without them, this wouldn't have been possible. So, yeah, on that note, I wrap up. If there are questions, I'm happy to take them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Naveen. That was super interesting. And as Naveen said, please do, I would encourage you to add more questions in the chat for Naveen. We'll be coming back to those questions in the Q&A later. Our next speaker today is Misbahu Mohammed. Misbahu is the co-director of Dahari, a Comorian NGO that works to create sustainable and productive landscapes with Comorian communities. Ms. Brahman holds a master's degree in natural environmental management from the University of Tamatave in Madagascar. She's been working with Dahari and communities in the Comores since 2013, more recently supporting these communities to implement fisheries management, which he's going to tell us about now. So, Ms. Bahu, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And good morning, everybody. And our presentation will be focusing on community-based fishery management in the Comoros Islands. Next. So the Comoros Island is a small island, group of small island archipelago in the Indian Ocean, located in the north of Mozambique Canal and the east of Africa. And the people of all this island depend on agriculture for their livelihood and fishing. And the main export product in the Comoros is elang and cloves. And we don't have no export fishing, and we don't have no industry in the Comoros. It's one of the poor country in Africa. Next. Next. And the fishing in Comoros is done with two type of model. We have a boat fishing, motorization by boat, and wooden pirogue. It's like the wood that we use for the poor fishing. They use to fish near the reef, and they sell the products in Comoros. We don't have like we export some products. It's for a local level, the selling of the fish. And we have a lot of women that they depend on reef cleaning, because it's an activity who most of the women they use for subsistence, for eating, and they catch fish and octopus and shell for the livelihood and for the subsistence. Okay, and the Hari and the Juventus in Comoros, they support a lot of association women to capacity building, and we develop a package of training about capacity building for association and awareness raising, and we make a lot of restitution for data to raise awareness for people. And we collect a lot of data about fishing on our sites, and the data is about the catching, monitoring, and the main goal is to make a lot of restitution and discussion with the fishermen, and to decide some potential solution about the problematic of the fishing and how we can lead management activity about the community fishing. And we give a training for sustainable technique, like using DEMA. DEMA is more sustainable than other activity that they use that destroy the reef. And we use also a lot of technique to raise awareness and to inspire other fishermen to engage about management technique. That one of the technique that we use, like extant visit, and it's a key technique that it's very spreading for local fisher. We done some visits on Zanzibar with Mambao, and we bring through villages together to create. And when they come back in Comoros, they create the association, Women Association Meshaboro. Okay. And with this association, we set up the first temporary closure in 2013, and after from we support Maishabora and help it by both organization. Like it's a woman association and local authority to set up the first temporary closure in Comoros. And the beginning of this activity, we face of different opposite for community, some fishermen, because it's depend of the catching, for example, octopus for the livelihood. And the closure was a big success when the first time that we opened that, and they helped us and to show the community Bahasa Indonesia can be very successful, and more then more people engaged in this activity after all. And the impact of this activity, we see that octopus individual weight doubled compared before closure, and it's a big impact for to show the community the impact of community based on management. And since then, we did 3 others temporary closure, and we learn more about how doing this activity and adaptive this activity with in other time, because we share the data with the community and the association, and we try to discuss together and how we can improve this activity in the next year. And the impact of this activity is the association, the Fisherwoman Association is recognized in national, and some organization and government invite them to travel around the other island to show and to share knowledge and experiences about this activity. It's like a big impact of this activity. And another big impact is we increase the awareness about people to change some technical, destructive, some technical, and now they use a lot of miri. Miri is like a wood, and before they use a metal rubber. It's very destructive because they destroy the coral and to access for the octopus, and it's we're giving them a lot of training to change this behavior, and now we see that it's very important. But 40% of fishermen use miri, and it's a big impact for us. And the metal river is now banned on the site that we did the octopus closure. And the big challenge that we make face, I think it's about this activity of temporary closure, because all the communities around the site that we did this activity now coming a lot when we did the opening, when we did the reopening, and they take a lot of advantage. They take a lot of advantage, and the community about this area now they reduce the impact that we found, and we have a lot of people who trampled and harmed in the reef, and it's like we have 700 people the last reopening that they work in the reef, and we decide that it's very dangerous for the reef, and now people decided, the community decided to think other strategy to limit the number of people in the next closure. And now we discuss with the community to make another measure to engage them in management and to discuss for a long time process about this activity. And what we did, we are trying to support the local association to implement a permanent no-take zone. The first time in the Comoros, we did this activity. And it's a long time is to have a preservation of marine resources. It's the first time in Comoros that we engage the community to do this activity. Okay.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Barber. That was super interesting.
Thank you.
I'm going to take us into who is Abra Ahmed from Planet Indonesia. Abra is Planet Indonesia's Program Strategy and Development Officer. He has 2 master's degrees, one in forest and nature conservation and another in environmental science. And at Planet Indonesia, he's involved with all aspects of project development, including maintaining, monitoring, evaluation, project planning, development of projects, and supporting proposals, reports, and communications, as well as the scientific research that goes into some of their publications, and just helps generally overall organizational growth. So he's got a huge wealth of knowledge. So really looking forward to hearing from Abra. So over to you.
Hi, thanks Charlie for that wonderful introduction. So maybe before I start my presentation, I just want to talk about say a few things about our organization. So at Planet Indonesia, we follow a community-led approach to solve conservation problems. And we do this by creating village-level partnerships to conserve at-risk ecosystem that communities live in tandem with. Before I dive into my presentation today, I would like to give a quick overview of the things that I will talk about today. So after a general overview of the landscape that we work in, I want to spend most of my time today talking about the challenges that communities were facing before our interventions there, and how we co-develop solutions to address these challenges, followed by some of the key insights and lessons that we learned working with local communities. Next slide, please. The our coastal project is situated in the Kuburaya landscape, which is located south of the capital city of West Kalimantan, Indonesia. At present, we are working with 6 villages with 700 direct beneficiaries in these landscapes. The primary livelihoods for these communities are fisheries and agriculture. Among the different villages that you can see on the map, we have been working in the Sungai Nibung village since 2017, and I'm going to use our learnings from our experience of supporting the village for today's presentation. Well, so when we first started to approach or talk to communities in the Sungai Nibung village, it was clear that community members were pointing out to catastrophic declines in crab populations, which they depended on for their livelihoods. When we asked community members about existing measures in place to reverse this situation, they pointed out to several government regulations, such as size class restrictions and restrictions on removing females with eggs. However, we soon realized that fishermen found these restrictions too extreme and impractical for their livelihood, as they did not fully understand the reproductive biology of mud crabs and its relationship with these restrictions. And as a result, many fishermen were not really following these restrictions or regulations. Also, another important aspect that villagers pointed out why these regulations were not really working was because there was no mechanism in place that would enforce these formal rules at the village level. So with declining yields and corresponding reductions in incomes, some fishermen were able to move away from mud crab to catch fish that were less valuable but more abundant. However, a large portion of the fishermen were just too poor to make the capital investments necessary to move out of crab fishing into catching other commercially valuable species. Due to this lack of economic maneuverability, many of the local fishermen were just stuck in this high value but low stock livelihood. Uh, in order to directly address the declining stock of mud crabs, we started to discuss the idea of periodic closures with fishermen and villagers of the Sungai Nibung village. Eventually, we implemented our first closure in 2018 through a participatory process that included participation of members of the village government, the local village forest management unit, also known as LPHD in Indonesia, and of course, mud crab fishermen from the community. Specifically, in order to choose the location of the closure area, mudcrab fishermen were shown a map on which they selected the area of the river that they would like to close off for fishing and determined when the closure would take place. The only thing that they did not choose was, or were not able to choose, was the duration of the closure. While the first closure was met with a moderate success, and which we later found out was mainly because the area chosen for the first closure was not a popular spot for catching crabs, the harvest received by the communities was large enough to encourage community members to conduct a second 3-month closure in a part of the village's fishing ground that locals described as a mud crab hotspot. The second closure was met with a huge amount of success, and the story of increased mud crab yields after the closure spread to the surrounding villages. To date, we have around 6 villages that are participating in these periodic closures, and our role has been that of a facilitator and to support and coordinate between the multiple fishing grounds in the roughly 15,000 hectare coastal area. We also found that in addition to increased harvest rates, periodic closures were also generating secondary benefits to fishermen community. In particular, many of the mud crab fishermen were explaining to us that it helped them to secure their fishing grounds from migrant fishermen who would come from other villages to catch fish in rivers from their surrounding villages. And they explained that, so basically they explained that by setting up fishing prohibited signs at the entry and the exit points of the rivers during periodic closures, provided them with the legal basis at the village level to deter outsiders from catching fish in the rivers that were part of the periodic closure. Another benefit that was cited by fishermen were related to time management. So during the periodic closures, mud crab fishermen were able to focus their time on daily activities away from mud crab fishing and concentrate on developing other sources of income for their families. Whereas previously they would have to go out to catch mud crabs more or less every day, and which was kind of like a gamble for them, as they were not sure if they would catch enough crabs that would be able to pay for their fuel cost. Hence, we found that periodic closures had positive impacts just beyond just increasing harvest rates for mud crab fishermen. Also, while while periodic closures are an important aspect of our support to coastal communities, we also support communities through various other field programs aimed at improving their socioeconomic resilience. So these programs are administered through our conservation cooperatives, which are platforms that we use to develop and extend community-led programs that meet the unmet needs for villagers. Some of the programs that we're facilitating in the Kuburaya region include the Healthy Family Initiative that improves community health, the literacy program, our community-led river patrols, village savings and loan program, and our social forestry program. At the beginning of this year, just 4 years after the first closure in Sungai Nibung, all 6 of our partner villages have come together to create Borneo's first locally managed marine area, or LMMA. Along with periodic closures, this LLMA will consist of community-based no-take zones, covering a total area of around 700 hectares of mangroves, clear requirements as well as restrictions, and sanctions for violations of rules under the LLMA. Next slide, please. So through our work with fishermen and communities, we found that periodic closures offer an easy to understand and easy to implement management technique that can be seen as a low-hanging fruit for coastal communities who can't otherwise implement things that are more scientific in nature, such as restricting the catch of age and size, age class and size restrictions on harvest. Also, we found that the social economic interventions at the village level that we were carrying out were essential to incentivize the participation of fisher communities in such a management technique. And lastly, I guess one of the big takeaways from our most of our sites, or all of our sites in West Kalimantan, is that we realized the key to successful engagement of communities depended on creating opportunities for participation in all stages of program development, such as the design, implementation, evaluation, and improvement of programs. Uh, so I guess that was the end of my presentation. So on behalf of the Planned Indonesia team, I would like to thank Blue Ventures for giving us this amazing opportunity to share our experience of working with small-scale fishermen in Kuburaya, and I'd like to thank everyone else who've joined this webinar today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Abra. It's really interesting, particularly the sharing the benefits and experiences of communities beyond the catch improvements that they're seeing from closures. So really interesting. Thank you so much. Now it's time to share some audience questions with our panel. So I think the panelists are all going to come back. We have the first question here for Naveen. Question is, are there examples of where organizations have successfully handed over the running of the project to the local community? What are some of the tips for ensuring a project doesn't come to a halt?
Yeah, specifically with marine systems, I am not really aware of projects that have managed to sustain itself beyond the duration of the project itself, like beyond the people who are, kind of anchoring it, having moved on. There are many organizations who are working at the grassroots, but because they're present there, they do continue to work on certain issues and aspects over the long term. But if one were to ask the question that if we remove those organizations from there, would those communities continue to, sustain the momentum or sustain the work? I really can't think of any examples for that from marine systems, which is why organizations embedded at the grassroots are really, really critical. And one really needs to make an impact on the ground level. You really need to empower these organizations and give them more agency. Otherwise, we're just looking at short-term projects, which creates more disruptions in a community's dynamics, and then people just close shop and shut shop and move on, and it leaves people in a much worse state than what they were probably earlier. So to answer that question, I really can't think of examples from the marine systems, at least in places where I have worked, and I can't think of any examples where the entire facilitator, the entire agency or organization involved has moved on, funding has stopped, but communities have just gone ahead with it. I really can't think of, but others here in the panel could definitely add to it.
Yeah, I think similar. It may be more that you're increasingly handing over components of the project to communities, and like you say, building capacity, but it does take a long time. And I think that's probably my experience of a lot of, these community, particularly fisheries management projects, because the science piece is a lot, and that iteration, adaptive management takes a lot of time to build at a community level. But I definitely agree that starting there is the best way to start. Thank you so much, Naveen. I'm going to take us on to the next question for Miss Bahu. This question is, was there... Oh, this one's going to go to Effie. So Effie is Blue Ventures project manager in the Comores, and she works really closely with Miss Bahu and the partner Dahari to develop community-based marine management initiatives. So, and Effie's going to be supporting on some of the questions in this session. So the question is, was there resistance to women taking up fishing? And if so, how did the community deal with it? And has it improved gender balance at all?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Charlie. And Thanks for having the chance to answer the questions. So I think I'm not clear about the question. Women taking up fishing. So traditionally in the Comoros, women do fish. They mostly do the reef cleaning traditionally. So it depends on the islands. But on Anjouan, where we work, at least they're doing the reef cleaning. What I can say is that they were never represented in the decision-making field before we provided support. And the Women Association that Ms. Bao was talking about is actually the first community-led women association, Fisher Women Association, that then had a place in management discussions and decision-making, and now being recognized nationally also, as Ms. Bao highlighted. So I think it did improve gender balance in the management and like kind of higher decision-making realm. And we're not trying to like expand that to other islands and yeah, raise awareness in other fishing communities too. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And then a follow-up question for you, Effie. Was there any resistance then to using the mwiri, so the wooden stick that Ms. Bahu talked about, compared to the metal rebar that was more destructive? Did people find it as efficient or maybe more old-fashioned? What was the sort of social components of that, and how did you overcome them?
So I think in general, people are quite reluctant to change. So there was definitely resistance. With the Mwiri, what we did is we had a few leaders in the association who worked a lot in mobilizing others, and our field technicians as well did a lot of the awareness raising, like informal discussions in communities, which helped like people discussing it. With the monitoring results, we were able to show as well that the catch per effort, so catch results with the Mwiri or with the metal rebar, were actually similar or like even like higher with the Mwiri, with the wooden sticks. So that helped as well, like raise awareness that, hey, maybe this method is not as bad as it seems. But I think mostly was the women leaders who actually like acted as role models and were then like followed by others. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Effie. Our next question is for Abra. So what are some of the challenges that you faced while trying to convince the community to adopt closures? What do you think worked best to convince people about the merits of the closures?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I guess that's a very crucial question that I guess everybody would face when trying to implement a temporary closure or periodic closure. So I guess like in the beginning, I remember some of our field staff explaining that in the beginning, the idea of a periodic closure was very confusing to community fishermen, because most people thought that we were just going to go in and build a fence around their fishing area and not let them fish anymore. So I think what the way we approached this was, as most conservation issues, is to first explain why it's needed and to kind of explain to them what these benefits would be after the closure. Eventually, I think the logic was intuitive enough for mud crab fishermen to understand that if we don't disturb the mud crabs for a specific period of time, we would be giving them enough time to grow. And because they're a fast-growing species, they would grow within the 3-month period and grow enough for fishermen to be able to harvest crabs that are of bigger sizes, which are actually in more demand, and they get a better price for them. So that was kind of the key thing that we needed to kind of get across to community members. So that was one of the challenges that we faced at the beginning. And I think what really worked best to convince people about the merits of the closure is, along with that awareness creation, it was the participatory process of choosing the rivers that would be closed. So in terms of choosing the rivers and the area that would be closed and when the closure would take place, that is dependent on the communities themselves. So the fishermen would come up with the time and the location. The only thing that we kind of thought that they would not be able to determine is the duration. So which we actually kind of took help from experts to understand the reproductive biology of the crabs to be able to implement a closure that would be long enough to allow them to grow enough to provide the benefits to the communities. So I guess definitely awareness creation and the ability for communities to choose where the temporary closures would be taking place.
Great, thanks. I think, did you guys do any exchange between other communities that had done this type of thing, done periodic closures before? I know Ms. Pahu, sorry, spoke about it in his, about that exchange being quite useful.
From our experience in when we started doing so the first village that we partnered with in the Kuburaya landscape was the Sungai Nibung village. So before that, we did not have as much experience of other communities kind of doing the same thing in the similar landscape. So no, we did not really have those exchanges for the first villages. But I think what happened was after the initial success, or maybe after the second round of closures, where the closure was actually implemented in a place which is known as a mud crab hotspot, the news of after the closure, when fishermen were actually seeing the benefit of the closure, the news of that spread around in the surrounding villages, which really helped us to kind of move into those villages, and it was easier for us to explain the benefits and how the community would benefit from such a periodic closure.
Great, thank you. So we have time just for one more question. It's gone so quickly. So the final question is for Naveen. So short-term management measures are like periodic closures that many of us have been talking about are quite simple for communities to implement and comply with. But obviously the complexity of fisheries, the threats that they face actually require a sort of longer term way of thinking about the sustainability of those fisheries and potentially longer term measures. How can we balance the need for the simplicity in management at the community level with the complexity of the fisheries and the threats that they face?
Yeah, yes, it's always trying to address issues that are simpler. So like I had mentioned at the while setting the introduction for the talk, I had given Lakshadweep is a much more, from a fisheries point of view, is a much more simple system for when you compare it to the rest of India. It's Indian fisheries, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it firsthand, is extremely complex and extremely complicated with small scale fishers and large scale mechanized sector, artisanal sector, all of them trying to work within a small, within the coastal areas that form their traditional fishing grounds or whatever. So some of these are easier to implement in islands, and when I say islands, both both literally as well as metaphorically, if they are systems that are closed and are not very porous to too many complications coming in, then it's a lot more easier to manage those kind of fisheries, because you're dealing with a certain community. There are not too many contradicting vested interests or competing interests operating within a small resource. So it's always easier to work with systems which is why most success stories we hear about in fisheries sectors all comes from systems like these, where it's easy to handle, and you're working with a smaller community. There are not too many complications. So I think it just we really need to look at systems where you're bringing in, the more complicated it is, the more you need time and effort and agency to kind of, if you want to build bottom-up processes. Otherwise you have to implement very hard iron-fisted top-down processes. But if you really want to build equitable democratic processes to fisheries management, then it's a huge challenge, and you really have to be in it for the long haul. There's no shortcuts to it. It's complication. The more it gets complicated, the more messy it is, and there's no way to work around these things. You just have to acknowledge it, live with it. Yeah.
Great. Did anyone else want, before we wrap the questions, did anyone want to add anything to that? Any other two?
Maybe I could just add, like, in our experience, what we kind of realized is, because we're now in the kind of like the stage where we're going to implement a locally managed marine area with the help of, with basically participation of 6 villages in that 15,000 hectare landscape. And what we realized is that this periodic closure, which is kind of like a short-term management technique, was like a stepping stone for communities to understand the benefit of cooperation, participation, and having like a area that is just closed off to fishing all year round, just a no-take zone, and also like these gear restrictions where you would have like these, and I'm talking very specific for mud crab fisheries. So these gear restrictions where you have these gears that allow smaller crabs to get out. If they even get into the trap, they would be able to get out. Whereas the gears that are used mostly by fishermen in Indonesia, I think mud crab fishermen in Indonesia are just like, they have these small holes, and where if a small crab goes in, it just can't come out. So I guess these short-term measures can be like a way, like a doorway for communities to understand like the bigger picture view of how these longer-term management techniques can work and benefit them. And definitely, what like the way Naveen was saying, that if you want to do like a bottom approach, it needs to be a very like the communities need to kind of lead that process, where organizations like us would be more facilitating and guiding them through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much, Abra. Effie, did you want to add anything? Or
Yeah, I was about to. I mean, it's said basically, like they have this example with mud crab, but with the octopus fishery in the Comoros, it's similar example. Short-term measure help engaging fishers towards long-term measures, and Isabel talked about the permanent closure, no-take zone, which is like slowly, step by step, we see people engaging more towards like more complex measures that have maybe benefits more in the term, but people start realizing bit by bit. Yeah, with local leadership, then you sustain local leadership, you manage to implement such complex and integrate the measures. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. It's really interesting to hear that complementarity that we're seeing and hearing from the different stories across the world. So I'm going to finish this there. Thank you again to each of you for your presentations, and for everyone that submitted questions today. That brings us to the end of the first part of the webinar. For those that pre-registered for the workshop, we're going to invite you now to discuss these issues in greater depth in the breakout groups. There will be a facilitator to guide you in each group, but we invite you to share ideas and experiences openly, and to enable everyone to benefit from the experience and wisdom within the wider audience. So while we sort you into groups, you'll all also be able to, I think, see a short video. But to join the discussion groups, there's a link on the live feed page, which will take you there, or you can use the one in your registration email. So finally, once again, thank you so much to Naveen, Abra, and Ms. Bahu, and also Effie for joining us, and we'll see you all in part 2. So click the link.